Look how close we are. Midnight hour approaches. Is it going to be war? Welcome to the second part of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, if you remember in the previous video, we looked at the background to the crisis and we looked at how things were bubbling up and things were getting very, very scary in Cuba as we get to September and October 1962. So let's carry on and have a look. September 1962, Khrushchev sends 114 ships to Cuba. What do you think they're carrying, ladies and gentlemen? Correct? Nuclear warheads, nuclear missiles. War is getting ever nearer. The Americans sent spy planes. Remember, how far away is Cuba from Florida? Correct, 90 miles. So the Americans could easily send their spy planes. They fly over Cuba and they take photographs which prove that the Cubans stroke Russians are building military launch sites in Cuba. America prepares its own ships. It's got its own fleet there, and it prepares 156 ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they're ready for launch. The Russians are coming with their missiles. The Americans are preparing their missiles. Things were getting very serious as September 1962 ticks away. We move into the key month, ladies and gentlemen, October 1962. 16th of October, we start what is called the 13 days, the crisis of the 13 days. Would it lead to war? Or would it lead to some sort of solution? Let's follow the days quite clearly and carefully. 16th of October, President Kennedy is told of Khrushchev's plans with the nuclear bases. There's the photographs, there's the proof. What will Kennedy do? How will he react? He's got a variety of choices. He could do nothing. Is that an option? He could immediately invade Cuba. He could launch missiles at the USSR. What else could he do? He could use an airstrike to destroy the missile bases, or he could send his ships and blockade Cuba to stop the Russian ships arriving. What would you do if you were President Kennedy? You don't want to be seen as weak, but do you want to start a war? It's a tricky one. Kennedy sets up an advisory council. He listens to his brother, Bobby Kennedy, and he decides to, hopefully you know this, he decided to blockade Cuba. 20th of October, he starts the naval blockade. He's going to send the American ships to surround Cuba to keep the Russian ships out. That was his decision. Was it a good decision, ladies and gentlemen? What do we think? 22nd of October, Kennedy tells the world, I'm going to do a naval blockade. And by doing that, he tells Khrushchev, withdraw your ships. Stop sending your ships. Turn them round and go back. Could Khrushchev agree to that? Balance of power. Could Khrushchev just give in to an American president? Have a think about that. 23rd of October, Khrushchev sends a letter to Kennedy. He sends two altogether, so we'll call this the first letter. He says, look, we are going to break your blockade. That's not good news for the world, is it? The Russian ships are going to smash through the American ships. What would be the result of that? Tick, tock, boom. So, the 24th of October, things are getting very serious. The Soviet ships are approaching the American blockade. They stop. They turn. Khrushchev says to Kennedy, and the world, we will use nuclear missiles if there is a war. The tension is increasing. Things are becoming very, very serious. 25th of October, the highest state of alert. Preparation for war is going on. JFK sends a letter to Khrushchev. Withdraw. Withdraw your missiles. 26th of October, Khrushchev responds to the JFK letter. He says, we will withdraw the missiles if USA does not invade Cuba. 26th of October. Listen carefully. Khrushchev says, we will withdraw the missiles from Cuba if USA does not invade Cuba. That's one option. But the very next day, the 27th of October, Khrushchev sends another communication, the second letter to Kennedy. This time he says, USSR will withdraw our missiles if America does not invade Cuba and America removes its missiles from Turkey. Remember? They were threatening USSR from Turkish bases. Well, that's more of a threat for America. So now Kennedy's got two letters here to deal with. What's he going to do? Well, he takes his advice. Which letter should he reply to? Same day, 27th of October, a United States spy plane is shot down over Cuba. The American pilot is killed. The tension is increased to unbelievable heights. It is very, very serious. 28th of October. We get into the key time here now, ladies and gentlemen. President Kennedy, advised by his brother Bobby, says, let's agree to the first letter. The first letter, not the second, the first letter. Can you remember what that was? USSR withdraws its missiles if USA does not invade Cuba. Kennedy agrees to that. What would Khrushchev do? Kennedy's made it very clear. He says, if there's no answer by the 29th of October, that's 24 hours time, USA will invade Cuba and that will be a war. And both sides would eventually, inevitably, start to use their nuclear missiles. Kennedy has given Khrushchev 1 day, 24 hours. People were frightened all over the world. There's evidence now. People who were alive at that time, children who were at school, said, I didn't bother doing my homework because I knew we wouldn't have to, because we wouldn't be getting a detention, because there'd be no school because of war. I was 1 year old, and when I grew up and became a history teacher, my dad said to me, he said, son, I held you in my arms, you were 1 year old, and I thought, this boy's never going to grow up. That's how serious it was. What did Khrushchev do? 29th of October, Khrushchev accepted Kennedy's offer. What a relief for the world. We had come within 24 hours, tick-tock, tick-tock, of war. But finally, war was avoided. Now, there was a secret deal, which I'll talk about in a minute. They are the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. You will need to know the events, ladies and gentlemen. Please learn them. But, as with all things in history, we have to look at the consequences. What happened next? What happened as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis? Well, first of all, Khrushchev seems to have lost authority. It looks as if Kennedy has won. In fact, the secret deal, the secret agreement, was that later America would remove the missiles from Turkey, which is what Khrushchev wanted. But that was not said at the time. So it looks as if Khrushchev has given in to Kennedy. That's the first consequence. It looks as if Kennedy's won. Now, this is 1962. By 1964, Khrushchev is out of power. He gets kicked out in the USSR, partly as a consequence of his alleged failure in Cuba. So that's your first consequence. Khrushchev loses face, he loses authority. Consequence 2, brinkmanship, pushing each other. Oh, go on then, you do it. No, you do it. Pushing each other towards war. Both sides realized that was too deadly a game to play, and it could not be followed. Brinkmanship, pushing each side to the edge of nuclear war, was not considered to be a good idea. Following on from that, both sides said, we will improve our communications. None of this writing a letter. They set up what was called the telephone hotline, 1963. Now, it actually was a telephone. In Moscow, they actually had a red telephone to speak directly the Kremlin to the White House, USSR to USA. Communications were improved as a result of Cuba. Now, if Khrushchev's authority diminished, Kennedy's rose. It seems as if Kennedy had won. Another consequence. Maybe for the world, though, better. A better consequence is this. From 1962 into 1963 and onwards, America and USSR start to plan and sign treaties. In 1963, there was a limited test ban treaty stopping the testing of even more nuclear missiles. That had to be a good thing. That carries on. 1968, they have a treaty about outer space. Relations between the two countries, the two superpowers, do begin to improve as a result of Cuba. This carries on into the 1970s when they start to use a word détente. We'll do some videos on that later. Better relations between USA and USSR. One side consequence was France, one of the allies of America in Europe. They decided to leave NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, America's gang of helpers, if you like, because they felt that they hadn't been consulted and America had acted in a very independent way. So France left NATO as a result, as a consequence of Cuba. The final one, the arms race, building more and more weapons. Now, I've already said they do begin to have treaties to limit that, which was a good thing. USA and USSR seem to be more balanced, more equal after Cuba. Here's 3 letters for you. M-A-D, mad. Now, that's a problem. Some people say that's a good word to describe it. Now, you can say building more and more nuclear weapons. Some people say is mad. Other people say, well, it had a point, because the MAD stands for mutually assured destruction. In other words, both sides realized that they would be wiped out by the other side if they used their nuclear weapons. Therefore, they never used their nuclear weapons. MAD. Both sides could be destroyed, therefore they are not used. Another consequence of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the time in history where we came closest to a nuclear war. It's worth learning the origins, the causes, the events, the consequences. Hope it's been useful. See you soon for the next installment of the Cold War. All the best.